So yeah, cool. Welcome everybody. Just waiting for folks to sort of chime in. So just want to make sure everything you can hear us and see us okay. Let us know this is a Zoom webinar, so I'm sure you know how to use Zoom. You can use the chat feature at the bottom. That's where you can tell us basically whether the audio and the visual is fine. So do let me know in the chat whether that is okay. I do believe that we can now say hi to everyone. I believe so. Let me know if that's if you can do that. It'd be good to make it just very transparent. So if you want to have a conversation or make a comment, everyone can see that comment rather than just people on screen, which is me and Rina. Okay. By the way, just a few more sort of on the housekeeping side. We will be kind of dealing with questions. Rina and I are happy to handle all of those. But please make sure to use the question and answer feature for that, because we'll set aside time towards the end of this webinar to dive into those questions. So we don't want them to be lost necessarily in the chat stream. Excuse me. Okay, let's get on with it. So, I mean, for people who don't know me, my name's Hung Lee. I curate Recruiting Brain Food. And we started a conversation a couple of weeks ago, actually. It was a really interesting conversation. We went online, and the question is, can you use AI to predict candidate success? And this conversation sparked a number of really interesting comments and contributions from everyone in the community. Because on the one hand, I think it will be very compelling if AI could help make predictions of this type. And yet on the other hand, there were also some concerns. We could see the level of concern from the community was quite high on the potential accuracy of this prediction, on the, even the implications. If it is accurate, what does that mean? How much ambiguity do we actually need in order to make society work? So anyway, we're going to talk about this. Rina's joined us for this conversation. Of course, Rina from Pera. Might be good for you to just introduce yourself real quick and just describe what Pera does, Rina. Do you want to give it 20 seconds on that?
Yeah, so thank you. So my name is Rina, Dutch national, lived and worked and did research in Asia for a long time. So been around in this field for quite a while. Actually, I think previously nobody talked about AI when I started working in it. And I'm very happy that now it actually got attention, of course, with OpenAI kind of driving that force behind it. I think what we intended to do when we started this company was to identify potential in candidates beyond what the current methods actually do. And we know that people are biased in itself. And I think there are new ways to actually take out these biases and to identify patterns that lead to success. And the starting point for us was actually, if we want to give fair opportunities to everyone, we want to hire people that actually are the best candidates. But then, of course, how do you find and map patterns of success?
Well, but we'll talk about this in due course, Rina. It's very, very interesting. I think by the way, if you haven't sort of heard of Pera before, do check out the company. I think they are one of the most interesting providers right now talking about how to make these types of assessments. We've obviously seen loads of, psychometric tests. We've seen functional tests. We've seen all kinds of stuff going on. I think most recruiters are fairly familiar with a load of those. But I really like Pera's angle about trying to surface out the inobvious things that actually drive a candidate's success. But let's get into some of the criticism real early, Rina, because some of them were really, powerfully held, and they're worth addressing straight away. So first one is, it's impossible to get all of the relevant data to assess a candidate's potential. Recruiters know this, by the way, because recruiters obviously are looking at CVs, they're looking at resumes, they're looking at LinkedIn profiles. We know that that's a very, very narrow set of information about a candidate, which is why we have to bring them into kind of a multi-stage assessment process in order to acquire more information before we're able to make that assessment. So how can a kind of a one-stop assessment ever beat the full pipeline? I mean, that's one of the things I think is a very common criticism of existing assessments, that they kind of overreach or overstate their ability to collect all of that information. So I think that's the first challenge we should talk about, Rina. What's your thoughts on that issue? It's impossible to get the right data sets to assess candidates' potential.
Well, it's not impossible. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. And I think everything that is really giving value and what's worth it is always hard to do. So I think what will help, and maybe we can, maybe it's important to address that a lot of things that were mentioned in the chats were about, it's impossible to get the right data sets, it's impossible to take out bias, it's impossible to predict it. But I like to shift the conversation to, yes, it's difficult, but not impossible. And we did the heavy lifting actually over the past 10 years to get to the right data to actually predict candidate success. And maybe one step back before I dive into how we did that and what kind of data we collected and what we actually discovered when looking at data sets in companies. I think the main question is, why is it important? And I think what we do see is that, the ratio of mishires is still extremely high. I think Gallup pointed out that 82% of managers actually says that the hiring missed the point, right? So they basically didn't hire the people that they wanted. And the problem is, and we will all recognize that, is that we usually figure that out after someone is already hired in a job. And then it's like, shit, I thought this was going to work out, but it doesn't. And so the question is then, how do we turn that around? And I think then for me, the question was really, if we want to ensure that we hire the right person and we give everyone a fair opportunity, I want to get to the crux, to the core of what drives performance in organizations. Because I don't want to be hired as a woman necessarily. I want to be hired because I have the skills that actually will drive impact in that organization. And if you're better at the job, Hung, then I want you to get the job. That's fair. But the problem is that we currently really don't have that data to predict that straight on, right? There's all kinds of methods that kind of are a proxy to get there, like personality types of tests or intelligence tests. But actually what I wanted to look at with the team was, can we find patterns in high performance? And the research behind that, and maybe it's good to show the research behind it, is that the classical view, I think, that HR has on performance is incorrect. So we always assume that it followed a bell curve, a normal distribution, thinking that some people in organizations do extremely well, some not, and most of us are in the middle. But this is actually incorrect. So we do see over and over again that performance in organizations follows a power law distribution, which we might know or are familiar with in economics. So 20% of people actually deliver 60% of outcomes. And that's consistently true. So if we look at research, and this is not our research, but for example, from O'Boyle, one academic who actually studied over and over again, I think he involved 665,000 professionals in 2021 studies. And he looked at this in, academic papers, publications, and MBA wins. And we see over and over again that the power law is true. So, and we see the same in the data that we collected. So over the past 8 years, we studied, I think, overall 5.5 million professionals in over 250 plus companies. And those companies that outperform others actually have and follow this power law. So it means that, again, 60%, 20% of your people does 60% of the outcome, which is the easiest measurable in jobs that have a very hard measurable objective outcome. For example, in sales or in customer success, right? Like things like revenue contribution or margin or customer feedback. And there is something very interesting in this power law, because if the law is correct, what does it mean for us? It actually means that if we shift 1%, right, on this curve, it has a 2.5% impact. And now the starting point for us at Pera 8 years ago or 10 years ago when we started this was to actually discover, what do these 20% have in common that the others don't have? Because if we can discover that, yeah, then we can help to move people internally to become top performers. And we can be better at hiring to figure out who is closely related to people that actually outperform others.
That is so fascinating, folks. I want you to give your comments on what you've just seen there. Firstly, what are your thoughts on this idea that top performers follow the power law rather than a bell curve? So in other words, in your business or even within the TA team, it's kind of conspicuous that the very best performers are actually, just the 20% that actually do extraordinarily high performance. Does that actually meet with your reality? Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on that. I think this would be very interesting for us to get some sort of sense what people think. By the way, Kieran, I think everyone can still just do the host and panelist rather than everyone. So I wonder whether you could still have a look at that and make sure people can see each other's posts. But yeah, let us know in your thoughts what your thoughts are on this. Secondly, what's underexplored is, why does the power law exist? Like, obviously, this is beyond recruitment because the power law seems to exist in multiple dimensions, in mathematics, in physics, in biology. Half of me thinks maybe it's got something to do with a network effect or something, where, if you have achieved conspicuous success at some point, that then makes it easier for you to get subsequent success, because people might give you more of a chance, or they'll be more forgiving of a mistake, or they will say, you know what, this guy's done it before, he's going to come good, and you actually have a longer experimentation or non-productive time because people are backing you this way. Similar, I think, to how, this is relevant in startup, isn't it? Where we know that the most successful startup founders are typically white, male, university educated, coming from a certain milieu, and you think, you know what, all that makes sense, because firstly, these people will have a much stronger professional and social and economic network to be able to make those types of risks. And secondly, because everyone knows that, if you are of that demographic, you're more likely to be backed and you're more likely to be given a chance to succeed. So maybe power law is related to that kind of network effect. Just or not, I don't know. We're not talking about trying to solve all those problems, but I wonder whether, as an aside, whether you've got any theories as to why the power law exists, Rina.
I don't know why it exists. One of the key things because you're addressing actually something else, it's more about the perception of success, right? So if you went to Harvard, you must be great. That's a perception. Okay, you did a great job in building one company, so you another. I think the point is that we need to study this. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. I think the point here is, let's look at data in companies. I think most recruiters actually don't have access, first of all, to post-hiring information because it sits in different systems. And the issue usually is that if we actually use human perception of what great looks like, we continuously pick people, that look like that, but not objectively delivered success. And that is the point I'm trying to make. Let's first look at, do we see objective information? We studied, as an example, just anecdotally. So we went into companies and asked them, can you give us your performance data of your employees? And can you also give us objective outcomes that you measure, your OKRs or your KPIs, that hopefully relate to a strategy that you're implementing and you want to achieve? And what we found was that actually if we looked at the relationship, so the correlation between how people were how people were seen, if we look at manager ratings, for example. So many companies do manager ratings, right? Every year, performance ratings from 1 to 5. We found no correlation between a manager rating and objective success measures. Close to 0. So what does that mean? We actually, so what it means is that even the methods that we're currently using internally, sometimes if we really have a close look at them, they don't make sense.
Yeah, and I think the measurement is so important, because how do we measure performance? I think that's totally, so much of it is subjective. And a great deal of it, I think, is almost deliberately made to be subjective. Maybe because, we don't want to, like, a brutalist calculation engine to rank performance, without some human nuance. I think that was one of the maybe that's kind of one of the things that's caused us to have measures like let's rate your colleagues and all this type of stuff. So then again, a lot of the work that human beings do, particularly in complicated organizations, it's very difficult to measure a quality performance, isn't it, Rina? Like, how do we deal with that? Do we have to individually come up with, let's say, per task or per function or per department, we come up with an objective that we know, okay, if you're working in sales, basically saying, yeah, we need that number to be this number. Okay, cool. You've hit me with the slides, Rina.
What
Looks like you're prepared for
ingredients
this.
do we need, right? Well, there's a couple of things we figured out while actually looking at training. So if you train algorithms, you want to look at the right data set. So one of the key things that we found out was that manager ratings are not the right ingredient, because basically they have almost no correlation with an objective measure of success. What we do, so we also know that personality types of tests usually also don't really have a correlation with job performance. So we found, for example, that people that actually score high on extroversion and agreeableness were the ones that got promoted by the managers, but were not per se the high performers. So again, right, we're biased. We're actually promoting nice people, but not per se the best people. So when
this is how I got my career. This is how I did my career, Rina. Basic
nice.
basic competence level, just quite good laugh and happy to have chats with people. No, but folks, what do you think about this?
Being nice is important.
Yeah, does it resonate with you? Have you observed people kind of progressing in the career path and the organization where you think, actually, the actual performance wasn't there. The reason why they've got it is simply because, if you're uncharitable, you can say that they're very good at schmoozing or climbing the career ladder. That's an uncharitable way of describing that. The more generous way is to say, look, this person is just simply politically skillful, or high EQ type individual. They're able to understand not only that organizations have basic functions and tasks to perform, but they're also human organizations, and you need to basically be able to understand how social organizations work in order to elevate and progress. Love to know your thoughts on this. I know a few of my friends have really had a problem with this experience, basically, because their self-perception has been that they're particularly weak at the social side, but they're very powerful performers, and they feel as if the people have overtaken them unjustly, and unfortunately that can lead to quite a bit of bitterness, I think. So yeah, be interested in your thoughts. Sorry, Rina, I interrupted you there.
Yeah, no. But I think the point is we have to look at the data, and when we start looking at data, we actually figure out if there are any relationships or not. And at the moment that you start to collect a lot of data, you can actually see if there are certain patterns that we discover. The point here is that, and someone, I think Ben is asking this question, if people progression is subjective and not objective, how does the Pera tool assess talent? So one of the key things when we were training the algorithms to look for patterns or to figure out if there were any patterns was to run comparative ranking, meaning that if we are in a group of 4 people and we work together, it's much more easy to actually ask someone who's better at teamwork, Hung or Rina, Rina or Ingrid, Ingrid or Kieran. So basically you kind of create a forced ranking, and you do that with at least 3 to 5 people to have statistically a represented set of data. And this is just to see what great looks like in the observation, in the eye of the beholder, of people that actually work with you. And not everyone needs to be great at anything, but at least you get insights, and the most fair insights, I think, the closest you can get to the truth, at least, of people that work together. And if you ask
Okay, so
yeah,
just underline this point. Does everyone understand the concept of comparative ranking? When I first came across this in preparation for this webinar, I was actually really intrigued. I love the idea because it forces people to make assessments. You're not just magically making up numbers and saying, I'm going to score this person, 1 out of 10 or whatever. You have to measure them against another human being to say, oh, actually, this person, and you intuitively know what's the correct answer, don't you? If you've worked with a team member, you kind of know, okay, this person is particularly strong at this. We know it. And they're also weak at this in comparison to this other person.
Yeah, you do it with a lot of people. The point is you do it with a lot of people on the same set of competencies. So I think that's where the math comes in, and also the fairness. If you do it with enough people, you get a very represented set. So that's one, but that's only one ingredient. The next ingredient is to look at actually performance data. So what is objective? What is an objective measure of success? Could be, okay, how many qualitative lines of code do you write within a sprint? What is client feedback, right? If you're working in customer success, could be revenue contribution. Again, you need to clean up this data set to actually make sure it's relative to one another, and then you start to see if there are correlations between certain competencies and a specific output. And then you need the last ingredient, because otherwise you can't really make a predictive model. You need something that is scalable and super personal, like a fingerprint, which is actually a digital interview. So we ask everyone to answer 3 open-ended structured interview questions. And the answers everyone gives is super personal, because I can ask you the same question as Kieran, and you will both answer your own way. And basically what algorithms can do is they can figure out more than 200 information points in these answers to create an optimal model. So assuming that, just as an example, teamwork correlates with revenue contribution, what do people have different in the 200 markers in their answers than someone who scored low on this and didn't deliver any, was not in the top 20%? Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to be interested to know what kind of questions these 3. It almost feels like magical questions. Like, what are these? Okay, ask me one of the questions. Like, are we interested, folks? Like, what are the killer questions? But
it's not really, the questions don't really matter. That's not completely true, because of course, if I ask you what is the best thing that happened to you in your life, and I ask you what is the worst thing that happened in your life, those answers will be quite different. So so also that is data driven, right? So we kind of, by now we've ran 5.5 million interviews, so we know what kind of questions to ask in what kind of setting. But an example could be, what's great leadership to you?
Right. And so I'm just trying to visualize how this would work. So this could be, how would I experience this? Would this just be a written on screen and I verbally respond to it, or do I write back the answer?
I think
How does this work?
we have also a screen on this, I think. So maybe Ingrid can help to show that. But basically, we ask 3 open-ended questions, and it's you can do it we do a lot of work in Asia. It's always on the mobile phone, right? So it's basically like this. You get 3 open-ended questions either on your phone or on your laptop.
Okay.
And you answer them in your own way. You can either, if you're blind, you can basically speak out and it translates to text, or more introverted people usually like to write, so particularly technical people. And this is where the AI comes in, right? You can create optimal models to understand how closely related your language, your own unique fingerprint, how closely that matches to people that have already proven after being hired in companies to be successful.
All right. So what you're saying is, as a result of the studies that you've conducted, you've got some confidence that there's certain traits or behaviors that lead to success in certain types of role.
Correct.
That's a really powerful comment. I mean, I'm interested to know. I mean, like what, how can I be more successful, Rina? That's basically
Well, it
that's
depends on the
basically the
job.
thrust of my questioning. But yeah, I mean, like
questions. The funny thing is now, right? Because the funny thing that I find is that over all these years, at some point, you start to find patterns that generally come back. So we now know what great leadership looks like. We do know which professionals outperform in innovation and what kind of competencies they have. If you drive commercial success, we do know what a great sales leader or person looks like in terms of their competencies, which we can now predict based on these 3 open-ended questions, which is extremely easy to use. But it
what
only
about the cultural context though? Because
yeah.
we might say, you know what, I think this is compelling, but at the same time, we also understand different companies operate in different ways, different cultures, etc. And what may be a very successful sales leader in one organization will be a disastrous sales leader in another organization. So I mean, doesn't that really like damage the universalized model of what is successful? Because you know, it could be that someone, maybe there are some really base traits, like, you know, someone has to be like hardworking, let's say, or they have to, you know, there's some basic stuff that is key to everyone's success as the substrate. But oftentimes you see someone be hugely successful in one context, put them into another context and they're a disaster. And I think ultimately that's because you need a different person there. It's not the person's performance hasn't dropped. There's just the wrong fit. So you know, I know it's not like politically correct no more to say cultural fit, but the guy's cultural fit was terrible. Therefore, he performed poorly. How does Pera answer that question?
Well, there's 2 answers to this. So one is you can create predictive models with training data from companies that we work with, right? So we actually run the 3 ingredients that I basically mentioned. You can actually collect them in companies that we work with and create optimal models that are specifically trained on employees for that specific company. You can replace competencies with values, if you like, right? When we talk about culture, what is a common language that people have in these companies? What are common values that people share? And who basically exhibits these values in the eyes of people that work with them? So basically, you can either work on specific predictive work models, but that is the heavy lifting because you need to collect that data. The other answer could be to say, start with already leveraging more intelligence that you currently have yourself based on the data sets that we collected over this period of 10 years, right? And you get at least more predictive than anything else and your own observation, because you want to get the confidence that you hire the best person and not looking at, you know, cues in a resume or in a specific conversation, unstructured conversation that we know scientifically doesn't correlate with any job success at all.
Yeah, I think most of us would probably agree that the conventional, if you like, conventional way to recruit and make assessments isn't optimal. You know, we make mistakes, of course we do, and you know, probably it's debatable whether all of our assessment efforts actually improve our hiring rate. Like I wonder whether a company might adopt a complete, by chance recruitment process, simply roll dice on who to hire, and the performance go up or down in any way. I'd love to see that experiment because we know that for all of the energy and effort we put in assessments, we make a lot of mistakes. People don't work out, and it's a suboptimal outcome.
Yeah, and that is
Now,
but can I relate to that? Because that
okay.
is a suboptimal outcome, but I think where AI can help us is to actually feed back that data into these predictive models. So it's not a static, it's not a static thing. It's actually a living thing. So you continuously learn by feeding back performance reviews, like I just mentioned, but also data. Let's say that you have extreme high turnover. We want to understand what is driving that turnover, right? So you can feed back bad examples, people that actually leave, into the system and learn what actually caused this, or whether there were any factors that caused this.
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. This I was actually going to kind of touch on that point. I mean, it's one of those where if we had all of the energy in the world, we could obviously make improvements. But it seems that in order to get to where we want to be, there's a huge amount, as your terms, Rina, heavy lifting. Like, do I need to, plug in a system into performance data? Do I need to, train a model with the proprietary data in the business? I'm getting pressure from my boss to go and hire 20 people. It's like, yeah, I don't have the time for this. So how do we make this like a practical thing? By the way, I think we're now able to speak to everyone on chat. So make sure if you have any sort of conversational topics or thoughts, share them, but default to everyone so that everyone can see it. So Sean, thank you for that. Mark, some excellent questions as well. I'm going to try and get to them at the end of the show. Okay, what was I saying? Yeah, how do we make this practical? Because it seems like, yes, this is all a good idea. I'm sure everyone's saying, look, we'd love to do it, but the but is, you know what? The cost of actually implementing is massive. Can't do it.
Well, that's what I said. Like, we did the heavy lifting for you. So we now collected all that data over 10 years of research. We've done the heavy lifting. So if you want to get accurate insights about how closely do candidates that I have in the pipeline relate to successful examples in the market, you can benchmark your candidates tomorrow. You can actually create specific interviews in the platform and interview every candidate in the pipeline based on these 3 open-ended questions. And there's 2 beautiful things in AI, I think, where they can help us as humans, because where we are great as humans is really we're great at, deriving conclusions. We have value systems. We can set certain targets. And algorithms sometimes see really obvious, simple things that we see, they don't see. That was also the contextual part. That's where the human actually comes in. But what algorithms can do is they can find patterns that we don't see, and actually see and find these unobvious patterns. And the other beauty of AI is that you can get to personalization, right? We've seen that now. We can actually provide personal feedback. Let's assume, right, Hung, you and me apply for a job, and both of us are an excellent fit, but there are certain competencies that maybe we should still work on, right, to even get the most out of it. But what you need to, and let's see in both of us is organizational excellence, but something that you need to work on is different than mine. Actually, I can give specific cues, specific intelligence back to you what to work on. That's also, I think, a big thing of AI, that you get more and more personalized information back. So this is very practical, right? So you receive as a candidate feedback, you receive as a recruiter feedback, and you can kind of wait and see a quick overview of candidates on where they score well. And I think the beauty of this is that you can make it scalable. You don't need to, I don't need to bother you with 5 different assessments. I run your data through different benchmarks. Okay, great. You might be a great fit for a commercial role, but not that well on an innovation role, because there's different competencies that drive success, but I can actually derive that from the same set of answers.
Yeah, you're being very generous with Jordan there, saying has potential. He's clearly a failure. It says here has potential. No, mate. I mean, there's another guy there below par. Obviously, he's
But you might have
Alfredo.
great potential for something else, and that's the point.
Right, I get it. It's really interesting, particularly to say that, okay, there's been a huge amount of people who have gone through the system. Therefore, we can map that against the performance data that they have performed in, and therefore, anybody new coming through the flow, we've already got a ready set benchmark for it. I'm very interested. Even though I share some of the concerns that we've seen in the chat there, and also in the conversation thread we had on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, where a lot of people would be saying, and by the way, we're going to go into these questions in a bit. So if you've got any critiques or questions or whatnot, stick them in the Q&A, and we'll get to them in a bit here. Yeah, let's talk about job role, because are you pitching this like a universally suitable for all roles, or is it like sort of more obviously applicable for certain types of function? I mean, I can see straight away probably it's more of a white collar type of thing, right? In the sense that, if I'm looking for, I don't know, maybe not. If I'm looking for someone who's driving a lorry, would that be something? It doesn't seem to me
Well,
like
you need to have
that obvious.
you have to have a driver's license. Or maybe in the
Right.
future you don't. Actually, it also becomes data driven.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sensitive to the idea that you could probably create some other tests that would assess a person's capability to be a good driver. Attention to detail. You could even measure sort of their physical stamina, let's say, and all that type of stuff. But this seems to lean more towards white collar knowledge work, in my opinion.
Yes,
And so that then begs the question: is there further so subdivisions within white collar work where you would say this is particularly suitable for? We've already had someone say, does it work for management consultants, for instance, which I imagine, yeah, immediately that seems to be very obvious. But are there other roles where you would say, this is definitely something that should fit into that type of work?
Yeah, well, if you look at hard objective performance data, the easiest way to measure that is in roles like sales, customer success, innovation, where you can also look at what is the output on innovation. So there are specific roles where, let's say, the hard KPIs are easier measurable than other roles. However, there's one thing I like to outline. Over all these years, we worked with competency descriptions from the companies that we worked with. And we got many, many different inputs. Remember the comparative rankings. Actually, what we found is that there's only 9 super traits, we call them, super competencies, that significantly measure something different. And of course, you can map those competencies to different job types to get at least an insight on how do you benchmark to people that already exhibit this competency in their job.
Yeah, and obviously, if I'm going to ask you what these 9 are, really, I really am interested. But then, of course, there's probably per job different weightings as to which competency is particularly important for that function. So, right at the top of your head, what are the 9? Because I think people will be scribbling away or typing away.
This is a big exam. Okay.
Oh, you even have
Oh,
preparation.
Well, okay, these are 6 actually, and these are particularly important in revenue-driven roles, right? So these actually correlate, and they have different weights, like you said, with commercial success. So it's innovative mindset, it's influencing, and again, there's many descriptions or related competency descriptions underneath that, but basically these descriptions measure the same thing. So innovative mindset, it's about influencing, it's about customer focus, it's about driving results, organizational excellence, and boldness. And those 6 actually are correlated with revenue output. So again, the 20% that does 60% of the output. And they have different weights in the background.
Right. Very interesting. So going back to comparative ranking, if I was involved in this, would I be comparatively ranked against these competencies, for instance?
Yeah, you would take, well, in this case, you would take the digital interview and we're basically mapping your fingerprint, your answers to these questions to our data set of people that actually scored really high on these competencies and hence on, in this particular case, on sales output.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Very interesting.
again,
What are
right?
the go
The
on?
question is, can I do this myself? Because I hire a lot of people, and I always meet people that say, well, I'm great at it. I say, yeah, of course, you are the exception. You are
Yeah.
probably
Well,
great at it, but
yeah,
it's so
100%.
hard. It's so hard to do.
Yes, people are very unaware. So I don't know whether you know, but before I launched Recruiting Brainfood, I actually had a technology product, which uh, different idea, but it was similar in the sense we were trying to collect people's sentiment data. So in other words, what type of work or what kind of things that they enjoy doing within the role of software engineer, for instance. And we wanted to basically create a time distribution as a way of describing ideal jobs. So for instance, if I, hated doing element A, but loved doing element B, then I could design a job with a high content in element B, and that would actually, based on time distribution, more time spent doing that, and that would create basically, I wouldn't say a fingerprint, but a kind of a visual image of the style of job that would most suit you. And we would just go ahead and match that with people or employers on the other side that would similarly, in a blind way, design their ideal person in terms of how much time they would spend. I don't know why I went into that segue, but I like one of the things that was criticism for us was that people's self-awareness was actually a critical problem because they may actually claim they enjoy doing these activities, but do they really? Even that is difficult because there is things like status attached to certain functions and certain activities. And typically we would say we prefer doing high status stuff, but do we really want to do that?
It's
Um, you know,
interesting because,
mo
yeah, sorry that I interrupted. No,
no, I mean,
I
go on,
always
go
look
ahead.
at data. I always try to look at data. So when we when throughout the work over these 10 years, we also collected a lot of other data, contextual information, intelligence tests, personality tests. And one of the things that we found is related to what you just said, is the way that we perceive ourselves in a personality type of test, a self-assessment. There is a gap between how we perceive ourselves and how others perceive us. And and the question is, what do we take as kind of the most relevant information? And in this case, we found that the relationship, again, hard correlations between how others perceive us, and again, not one person, not a one manager rating, multiple raters, is actually the closest we can get to the truth, which is also something different than most, I would say, assessment tools do. They're still more artificial than intelligent.
Yeah, and that's something that's worth bearing in mind, folks. We're not trying to be a completely infallible tool here. That's not the ambition of obviously. Let's be reasonable. We're just trying to kind of make a better or more accurate way of assessing someone's capabilities and incremental progress towards that end. So yeah, very, very interesting. So just before we kind of move to the questions, Rena, I just want to again visualize how this looks. If I'm asked to rate someone, how does that work? Is that just a questionnaire basically, or it's something that's sent in a digital form, isn't it? Where people can say, look,
Yeah, we also have tooling for that. But I would say if we really want to get into custom predictive models, we run the process like I mentioned with the 3 ingredients, which is the heavy lifting, because we basically have to collect that specific data. The easier way to step in is actually to run digital interviews on candidates already leverage the data that we have, and then over time actually start to feedback specific performance data based on a comparative ranking, which is a digital tool that we have in our platforms. And we add that and we get to understand if there are specific patterns in your company compared to the benchmarking data that we have. Sometimes it actually happens that it isn't the case, but we can figure it out along the way.
No, I totally get it. And you know what? This all points, I mean, I'm very enthusiastic about this. All of this points to direction of progress as far as I'm concerned. And I think that as business sort of as people who work in business, we're probably quite keen to move to a place where, you know, we can have more accuracy in understanding who the best performers are, and who the oh yeah, thanks, Kieran. But yeah, let me know what your thoughts are on this so far, guys. In the chat there. I know this is kind of new for me. This is very new. I didn't sort of think that we'd encounter something of this style deployed commercially into the recruiting space. But I'm very interested in sort of the idea and also in seeing a bit more about the implementation. So let us know in the chat whether this is interesting or not. Are you know, actually, I don't care. This is ridiculous. Your feedback's an important part of it. So let us know. Okay. Kieran has nudged us to say we need to share some client cases, Rina. So,
Oh, really?
yeah. So what have we got here?
Okay, so what we see here is a company, actually an Asian company. This is a recruitment agency. They've been working with us for the past 6 years. So the CEO started working with us very early on. We built a specific custom predictive model for this client. So we did the heavy lifting with them. We collected the information, the 3 ingredients that I mentioned. And that model was then used to actually hire and select new candidates. And then, of course, the proof the pudding is in the eating. We wanted to see if these candidates that they hired actually, what did they do in terms of revenue contribution? These were consultants that had to source candidates. So they were recruiters that source candidates, but they also had a very strong commercial target. And so they also had to get new assignments in for the company. And what we found after 2 years, and now we have 6 years of data. After 2 years, we already found that top performing candidates, so that were in the top 15% of the digital interview, so the top 15% candidates actually outperformed their peers with, at that time, 75% more revenue contribution, and now over 6 years, it's 94%. And so basically, the people that he hired do 2x better than their control groups of employees that are sitting in the company.
That's very, very interesting. And by the way, I think recruitment agency is probably the most ideal audience for this tool, because we are measured on numbers anyway, aren't we? I mean, I think everyone in the crowd probably has been a recruitment agent at some point. It was literally raw numbers to determine, you know, whether you were succeeding or not. So objective measurable. There were also very different personality types. I remember in recruitment agency that succeeded. So it wasn't about personality, but it may well be it was consistent competencies that led to success. That's very, very interesting.
This is, of course, easy to measure, right? There's another client case, also a sales agency that did this in 3 months' time. But another example I have, because again, sales is easy to measure. We also worked with one of the largest logistics companies in the world, and they were going through a digital transformation, and they asked us to actually look at what competencies do people have in these teams that have to innovate, that come up. So they were measuring output in terms of new innovations that they would bring either internally or externally to the market. And that was very interesting. We found our hypothesis was that those candidates that had the professionals in the company that had those competencies would actually deliver more output. but we actually saw the opposite. So our hypothesis was not correct. And we're like, huh, that's strange, right? And then we asked them, can we actually measure leadership, the managers that are managing these teams? So we also asked them to run that digital interview. And what we found out that some of these managers, they were having typical competencies that are great for, let's say, managing an existing business, but not per se managing a very innovative, fast moving business. So actually by changing people around, they increase the innovation power. And that's the intervention. But then we're talking less about hiring, but more about what do you do internally with that type of data?
Well, this is what I'm saying. Not that I've said it before, but basically, I can totally see this being a value in an internal mobility play. We know retention is one of the big things that's happening in terms of CEO priorities this year. And one of the ways, of course, that you improve retention is to provide internal opportunities and career development for your staff. So, but we don't know who's good at what, I mean, the job title doesn't tell you that. And oftentimes we, sadly forget about a good performer because, they're just doing their job. It's like, they're not in the visibility. Something like this, I think, could be really, really interesting. What's the? I mean, I'll get into the questions a bit, but I have to ask you, like, how is this? How much does this cost? Like, presumably you do it on a per interview level, right? And so is that how a thing is monetized?
Yeah, it's monetized based on the per person, and depending on the volume that you're hiring, and then also depending. So there's kind of a base cost depending on your volume, and then on top of that, you can actually get multiple insights on one person. So assuming that I'm hiring people for my company and I'm hiring a sales director, I want to measure commercial success, but I also want to measure if this person actually fits an innovative company. So I take two benchmarks. So the base cost is then, let's say, €20, and on top of that, I pay €5 more for additional information whether this person fits an innovative company.
Got it. That's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, yeah, very interesting. Cool. All right, listen, let's get to the questions, Rina. Unless you got other stuff to. Well, what is this? We have a special discount. How generous of you. Brilliant. Folks, we're going to get to the questions in a bit, but we'll keep this thing on screen because if you want to just try this and get a huge discount, you can actually do it with that QR code, I think. Or you can book it. How do they trigger this discount? They just say they saw it on Brain Food or something, or is that QR code already going to give them that discount?
Yeah, exactly. You can get, I think, you can see that I'm a great marketeer.
Yeah, just claim the discount
with my team. Yeah.
Just argue for the discount, see what we get. All right, let's get to these questions here because we've got a few people waiting here, which is great. I'm going to just shout them out because people might not be able to see them. Let's go with this one from Charlotte. Charlotte's saying, would you say that a company needs to be a certain size to have enough data for this model to work? Would it only be successful for a larger company? So is there optimal size? Are you shaking your head?
No, in the past, of course, yes. But now with the data that we accumulated, basically every company can start benchmarking candidates tomorrow. So you don't need to have a particular size. Actually, if you want to get the confidence, to hire the best people, then you can start now tomorrow. If you want us to build a specific custom predictive model, we need between 50 and 100 people to actually make that work.
Yeah. So Charlotte, I think that's the custom model is and that I assume that's a separate cost, right? So people have to pay a project cost for this. Yeah, cool. Anonymous attendee, I think that's the same question. I mean, is it high volume roles only? Answer's no, because there is an existing data set. But if you want to model against your own group, your own team, to have a custom model, then it's about 150, 200 people. Okay. Lewis has said, do you see any hope these tools being used in the EU despite the increasing interest of regulation against AI and enhanced GDPR laws? So I don't know whether this is hostile to GDPR. I think basically people can sign a consent to it, and then you can delete it after a certain period. So I think it's pretty GDPR proof. But on a general case, I think Lewis is saying, if the EU progressively legislates against the use of AI into assessment, do you see that being an issue? And, how are you handling, I guess, compliance risk or, legislation environment that is not friendly to, the direction of travel that Pera might be going down?
No, I think we're quite happy actually also with the AI Act that's coming in place, because it creates a level playing field, because we have to basically describe each step of the process and what kind of data and how we basically, what steps we took to encourage unbiased training data. And I think we're quite happy with that, because we put some thought into how to best do this. So for us, that's I think a good thing. Of course, what you don't want is that it kind of slows things down, particularly in the EU, for companies to actually implement this. And so what we do is to basically help companies to comply and to know and to have the right data processing agreements in place, to understand that there are certain levels of consent, and that you delete certain data, and that you have the privacy controls in place. So that's extremely important, particularly for a company like ours, and we help companies to do that. Large corporates have that in place, but smaller companies, basically, we again have the examples, the data processing agreements in place to run that.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty comfortable. I've seen sort of tools that are way further in breach of GDPR than this. Okay, there's a few more questions in chat. I want to reach them real quick before we have to get off the air. Really interesting from Mark Dawkins, who talked about the limitations of communication, the non-verbal communication typically taking place, micro-expression, body language, pheromones, etc. All of that stuff is part of how we communicate. And yet the Pera system is purely a verbal response, even a written response. Are we not receiving a very limited amount of data about this individual? Your answer to that question, Rina?
My answer to that question is that we, throughout years, we also looked at a much larger data set. So for example, we studied videos, we studied tone of voice. What we actually found is that the written language, or verbally spoken and translated to text, is actually the most clean signal to identify or infer competencies from it. We found, for example, in data sets that high-pitched female applicants were less likely to be hired than lower-pitched male candidates. So actually we found that, for example, these tone of voice or intonation or the level, the tone, actually got quite biased outcomes.
Yeah, well, maybe that's to do with that. May not be irrelevant, though. Here's another thing that's interesting. Perhaps your tone of voice is part of your influencing skills. Like, who knows? So anyway, we're heading down yet another philosophical conversation there, Rina, which we don't have time for because we are out of time. I just want to thank you for sharing your time with us, Rina. I know you've got loads of stuff to do building this product. And it might be interesting for the crowd actually just to learn a bit more about your background, because it's very different from a lot of other people that have moved into the recruitment technology space. So I wonder whether you could give us just a quick, 20-second career path of where your journey has taken you and why sort of Pera has emerged at the end of it. Do you mind just giving us a quick run through of your journey, Rina?
Ooh, so well, prior to Pera, I ran a, let's say, headhunting recruitment agency, and before that, I was part of a large corporate in science, running an interesting lab here in the Netherlands and globally. But I always found that people are the, one of my drivers is to use technology where we have limitations as people. So I'm very interested to build new tech and new innovation that is super simple to use, but has a huge impact in human decision making. And I've done that throughout my career. And it brought me to Asia, where I learned that, you know, sometimes you don't need to be perfect to just test it out and learn and leapfrog to the latest and see the results and work in a data-driven way. I think one of my key learnings that I want to give away is stop hiring for hiring tomorrow. Like, start to look at data. Our job is changing. Again, I ran an agency myself. I've seen that we have a lot of limitations as people. And I think if we can leverage tech to help us make better decision making, not taking out us as humans, but the combination sees different things and gets to better decisions. And I think that's only humanizing our field. I'll leave it to that.
Yeah. Yeah, let's leave it at that point. Great stuff, Rina. I definitely want to continue having this conversation in some other way. But thank you so much for your time, Rina. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this session. Do book a demo with Samar. It looks like you just have a look at Pera. I mean, I think it's quite an interesting tool. I'm actually quite interested to do it myself. So I wonder whether I can just give it a shot.
Sure.
And you know what? It's one of these where I think it'd be quite interesting to see where the brain food community in general would lie on the general competency level. I think, you know, just as a curiosity,
yeah. Test it out.
I wonder whether that would be interesting. Anyway, folks, give this a shot. If you're a candidate, can people try this for free as a no, they can't. I have no idea. Like,
We'll figure something out.
Yeah, because I think it'd be quite interesting for people to volunteer to see it from
Yeah.
a candidate point of view. And then, of course, the audience here might also be on the recruiter and buyer side. So different story there as well. But I think people will probably want to try it out before they would from the candidate journey perspective, as a road test. Okay, cool. We're out of time. So thank you so much, Rina. By the way, folks, thanks for watching. The guys will be in touch with you with more information. But we'll see you next time.
Thank you.